Hi, my name is Beth Cerrone, and today I'm going to talk about using multimedia in the classroom. So what I've done is created a little keynote presentation just to kind of help me guide my way through this discussion. So let me go ahead and start that. So the things I want to discuss in this little video cast are what is multimedia and hypermedia, just going over the definitions of those two. Hypermedia is something that is a new concept to me. I had not heard of that before. Secondly, I'm going to talk about what are some types of hypermedia. And we've discussed that in some of our previous assignments already. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about what are some benefits of using multimedia in the classroom for both the student and for the teacher. So the two definitions. Multimedia, as I mentioned, is something that has been around for a long time and has been utilized within a classroom for quite some time as well. According to our textbook, Technology Tools for 21st Century Teaching, it can be defined as basically combining different types of media. And those types of media can be graphics, they can be sound, video, animation, and using them as a means to communicate different ideas. So this is obviously used in advertising and graphic design, all that kind of thing quite often. So hypermedia, where the term hypermedia comes from is from the idea of a hypertext. And you've probably heard the term hyperlink before. And what that is in a website, when you click on a link, it goes to another document. And it can be linked within a Microsoft Word document as well. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be online. So basically what it does, it links text to other documents. Or can link other, not just text as well. So a hypermedia document takes this idea to another level. So it's going to link to all other different types of media, whether it be sound or video or whatever it may be. And it's kind of a way to organize all those things together. So the World Wide Web is a perfect example of a hypermedia system, so to speak. So in that system, if you click on a link for multimedia, it's going to bring you to all this related information, and some of that information will be PDFs. Some may be sound clips, some may be videos, etc. So that's kind of how I view that. It's also it's a way to it also can be like a simple little link to a sound clip. You might have like a little picture of a of a little sound symbol, and you can click on that and actually hear a podcast or something like that. So that's another example of hypermedia. So the different types of hypermedia. We've talked about instructional software quite often. We had an entire seminar last week, I believe it was. So some different types of instructional software for students are drill and practice, also tutorials. YouTube has a whole slew of different tutorials from Khan Academy as one of the more famous ones, and so on and so forth. So instructional software allows students to be interactive with their learning. They can stop and start tutorials. It can be games, so it makes it more interesting and fun for students. Another type of hypermedia is interactive or electronic storybooks. And that's kind of exactly as it sounds. So a storybook it's a great way maybe for a second language learner, an ELL learner, or a special ed learner. Something like that, for that kind of student, or for really any students, it allows students to interact with a particular story. And you can stop and start, it might ask questions to lead you to the next part of the book, etc. Reference materials, so you always hear, although I say this all the time to my students, I always say Google it. So on the web, there is a whole slew of all these different reference materials, to Wikipedia, to all these different encyclopedias online, to CNN, to news media, all that kind of thing to help students find different information instead of going to a traditional encyclopedia. Development materials. Those are things like clip art, different graphics, maybe sound clips, things like that you're going to use to help develop different documents and work that you're doing. So, I've broken this down into two parts. So I'm going to talk about the benefits of multimedia within a classroom for students. So, and I'm thinking of this in two different ways. The first way is as a student utilizing this multimedia in your classroom. So obviously there's huge increased motivation. Students are, this generation of students in particular, are so used to having to be engaged and all the time. They get distracted very easily. So making it more interesting and engaging and interactive, I think definitely increases motivation for students. Um, so for example, things like video would be very useful. Doing things like Jeopardy games or anything like that, just to have their students are still learning, but they're learning in a different way. And it's not as monotonous as a teacher standing up in front of the classroom and teaching. They can actually interact much more frequently than a teacher-driven, teacher-centered classroom. Flexible learning modes. So in that respect, so students are able to we're able to differentiate learning, first of all. So if I have a student that's way up here and one that's here, I might start, if I'm doing a tutorial or something like that, I might be able to start, or a game, start the higher student at a different level. You're able to take your time, you're able to go back and review and things like that as well. So that allows a classroom to be easily more differentiated, excuse me. Development of creative and critical thinking. So with this, especially with things like problem-solving software, things like that, I think it's very useful. It's very strategy-oriented, so students really have to think through the process. And a lot of video games are that way as well. And it is, there's pluses and minuses to video games for sure. And I think that is one of the pluses of actual video games that aren't educationally based. There still is a strategy. You have to develop a strategy to solve the problems. Along with that too, as a student, students can also have multimedia projects to present their information. So for example, in my classroom, I always have my students use some sort of multimedia, whether it be a screencast recording or voice thread. They have to do some sort of presentation or tutorial. I give them a topic, so it might be quadratic equations or quadratic formula, using quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. And so they have to present it. They can use, choose from 10 different types of ways, multimedia presentations. And and I think with that process, they really have to be creative. They really have to know their concept really well because they're actually presenting it. So I think that it engages them a lot more because you can really see you really can see whether they understand it or not. And it's much more interesting for them as well, rather than just taking a test. And along those lines as well, developing skills. For this workplace that they're going into, they need these skills. They need to be able to adapt and create different types of presentations, all different types of presentation, not just PowerPoint, or they might be able to have to Skype or something like that as well. They might have to do the presentation that way. So, or they might have to incorporate something like Prezi or Educreation or something like that to talk through and sell whatever product they're selling, if that's what they were working into. So those are the benefits for students. For teachers, so for teachers, I'm a math teacher, so for me, in particular in classes such as calculus, things like that, using multimedia applets, things like that, I'm able to present material, really complex material, in a more visual way. And I think so many people learn in a visual way, including myself. So I think that gives an added benefit. You might hear the audio part of a lesson as a lecture, and then you're presenting this complex material. You can see how a particular object rotates. You can figure out the volume of a function that's rotating around a particular axis, and you can actually see what's happening. So I think that's a huge benefit of multimedia, and there's so much out there that has been developed for that concept, for that idea. I also think it makes it much more interactive. You can use things like clickers, or you can do a Jeopardy game where the kids are much more involved and in the process. It's not just me standing up there teaching a lesson. The students are engaged. They're actually participating. They're presenting as well. So and it's much more fun, I think, and that kind of combines those next couple as well. I think it's very important to have a student-centered classroom. Having a teacher just stand up there, present the material is good for some students, but not for most. And the last thing, able to organize a lesson more completely. What I mean by that is I feel that when I put together my lesson incorporating multimedia, I feel like it really makes me think through the process. Or if I'm creating a tutorial, a video, like I did for my other project for this week, I think it helps me think through the process. So I'm going to do a worksheet here, but then I'm going to have the kids use an applet here to test this part, then I'm going to use a tutorial video to tie everything together, etc. So it really makes me think through the process, and it really gives the kids a really good, a bigger overview of the lesson. It gives the audio and the visual part of it as well, so which I think is much more beneficial. So essentially, in terms of references, I definitely got quite a bit from our textbook itself. So that's the main thing, and a lot of these, I use multimedia in my classroom pretty much every day. So a lot of these ideas came from myself as well as from other teachers that I teach with. So I hope that was useful. Thank you for listening.